Tonight, a CBN News exclusive.
It's important to note this is not a job I ever aspired to.
We sit down with Speaker of the House Mike Johnson to talk politics and purpose.
That's my humble prayer every day, that we would be able to serve well and bring honor to God in the process.
And Iowa's 6-week abortion ban heads to the state Supreme Court. We break down the case and what it could mean for the pro-life fight. Plus, the latest on Israel's fight to free hostages held now in Gaza for more than 6 months. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Speaker Johnson set to appear with Donald Trump while the security of his job is in doubt. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm John Jessup.
From the CBN studio here in Washington, I'm Tara Mergener. Well, Republicans may control the United States House of Representatives, but for anyone keeping score, they are running a chaotic conference. At the helm of the mayhem, Speaker Mike Johnson.
Facing the threat of ouster from members of his own party, Speaker Johnson is turning to the one person who could tip the scales, drawing up support from the GOP's most conservative wing, former President Donald Trump.
On Friday, the speaker heads to Mar-a-Lago, where he is reportedly planning to give a joint speech with Mr. Trump on the issue of election integrity. It'll mark the first time the two have appeared publicly together since Johnson assumed the role.
The meeting comes as the Republican leader faces backlash from his own party and a less than ideal public perception. According to recent polling from The Economist and YouGov, only 21% of American adults view the speaker favorably.
But that's not deterring him. In an exclusive interview with CBN News, Johnson says God has called him to serve during these turbulent times.
He spoke with chief political analyst David Brody about what he described as the spiritual battle at play today in America and the challenges that lie ahead.
Speaker Johnson, David Brody. How are you? Great to see you.
When we met in the ceremonial room on Capitol Hill, House Speaker Mike Johnson looked at ease, although his job has been anything but.
You are Speaker of the House. It kind of feels like you actually might have a different title, Herder of the Cats.
It's important to note this is not a job I ever aspired to. We got ourselves in a bit of a pickle here.
A GOP pickle that can go from sweet to sour at any time. He's the first speaker in history to take over in the middle of a session and finds himself running a one-seat Republican majority and split caucus.
Democrats typically tend to think more kind of like a union. They sort of stick together. They're more monolithic. They move as a herd. They're more kind of social animals, right? Republicans, by contrast, are rugged individualists. We care deeply about our core principles and our philosophy, and we're not easily moved, and that's a great blessing, usually. But when you're trying to keep all those cats together and move in the same direction with a one-vote majority, it sometimes presents challenges.
Such as House Freedom Caucus members frustrated over what they call bad spending deals with Democrats rush through the process in typical D.C. fashion.
They're clearly concerned about the way you're governing.
Yeah, so what some of my colleagues will privately admit, but not always publicly, is they understand we have the biggest challenge that's ever been presented to the Congress.
That hasn't stopped Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene from filing a motion to vacate, to jettison Speaker Johnson, because she doesn't think he's standing up enough for conservative policy positions. Of course, that's not easy when Democrats control the White House, Senate, and you barely have a Republican majority in the House.
She says you're, basically a deep state operative. She didn't use the word operative, but you're working for the deep state, in essence, paraphrasing. Also, she's attacked your faith.
Well, I try to follow all the biblical admonitions as I do every day, and one of them says you bless those who persecute you. I'm getting a lot of practice in that right now. And that a soft word turns away wrath.
That doesn't mean he's not pushing back against her threat.
We've got to demonstrate to the American people that we can keep the train on the tracks. And so pulling a motion to vacate, removing the speaker right now, is exactly the opposite of what we need to show the country.
Do you believe that if there's some sort of motion to vacate that she goes forward with this, that there will be some Republicans, one or two, whatever it is, that jump and go with Democrats and Hakeem Jeffries is all of a sudden speaker? Do you think that is a potential reality here?
Well, listen, if the chair is vacated, it's certainly possible you get a Democrat speaker.
And soon, Speaker Johnson will need to decide whether to put a Ukraine funding bill to a vote, something conservative members do not want.
If you put this Ukraine bill, even with some of your creative suggestions, on the floor, that's going to probably trigger that motion to vacate?
Well, we're working through all those issues with all of our members. We're trying to build that consensus that we talked about.
On the issue of abortion, consensus will be difficult for the GOP, especially now that former President Trump just refused to endorse a federal abortion ban, a move the avid pro-life speaker tells us he understands.
What we have to do right now, our challenge, is to build a culture of life. Before you can have a political consensus on an issue that's this controversial, you have to build a cultural consensus first.
So you're saying it's a smart move, at least in these times right now politically. It just seems to kind of fit the moment for now?
Well, I'm saying that we recognize right now that the votes don't exist in Congress to have a federal ban at any level. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
One issue where the House GOP seems unified is illegal immigration, arguing President Biden's policies have been disastrous for America.
I think they want that open border, and I think their actions show that.
Why? Why do you think they want it specifically?
It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but I think it's actually true that the ultimate design is to turn some of these illegals into voters for their cause and to change the census outcome in 2030. Because if you can distribute people around the country in strategic ways and put them in strategic places, the census does not just count citizens, it counts residents, all persons, and that could dramatically affect the map in Congress. I mean, it sounds like some sort of crazy, criminal design, and in my view it is, but I think that's what they're doing.
Johnson will certainly speak his mind, especially when it comes to his Christian faith, a stance that's led to some criticism.
Well, we've been mocked and I mean, mercilessly in the press. They've tried to attack me and my family, my wife and children, and look, we're undaunted by it. I mean, that is going to happen if you stand for truth.
And nowadays, if you say the word spiritual warfare, the left needs smelling salts at that point. I mean, so talk to me a little bit about the spiritual state of this country, of America today. And do you see it in those terms, spiritual warfare going on?
I do. I mean, if you're a Christian, that's how you understand these things. We're really in a battle of worldviews right now. It's not even a battle between Republicans and Democrats anymore. It's two competing visions over what kind of nation we are, who we are as a people. Remember, Marxism, communism, socialism are grounded in the belief that there is no creator, there is no God. And that's the essence, that's the foundation of their belief. That is not who we are.
What happens to America if that godless philosophy wins out?
Ronald Reagan said, if we ever forget that we're one nation under God, we will be a nation gone under.
Johnson is determined to do his very best to make sure that doesn't happen on his watch.
I have no value other than as a servant. I'm trying to be a servant leader here, and at a very challenging time, in very difficult circumstances. That's my humble prayer every day, that we would be able to serve well and bring honor to God in the process.
David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
All right, turning now to the latest battleground of the nation's abortion debate. With less than 2 weeks to go before a new abortion ban goes into effect in Arizona, lawmakers there are fighting it out in the legislature. Republicans have blocked attempts by Democrats to open debate on repealing the law. The measure on the books since 1864 bans nearly all abortions. The only exception is to save the life of the mother. The state Senate erupted into chaos Wednesday when outraged Democrats shouted at their Republican colleagues.
Shame on you! Shame on you!
Now, that law adds to reasons abortion is front and center this election year. Former President Trump blasted the measure and says he would not sign a national law restricting abortion. Meanwhile, President Biden has vowed to enact federal abortion protections.
Abortion also taking center stage in Iowa, where access to the procedure is at stake as the state Supreme Court examines a 6-week ban signed last July by Governor Kim Reynolds. The measure sparked lawsuits that blocked the law from taking effect. Now, despite legal setbacks, Iowa's legislature has cleared the way for its enforcement starting April 24th.
And the state Supreme Court could stop that. And today it heard arguments from challengers hoping they do just that. Abigail Robertson has been tracking the case and joins us now with more. Abigail, what does this ban include?
Well, essentially, this new measure, commonly referred to as the fetal heartbeat law, bans abortions after a heartbeat is detected, typically around 6 weeks of pregnancy. Now, there are exceptions for health of the mother and baby, and rape if it is reported within 45 days, and incest if it is reported within 140 days, with women not necessarily needing to report those to the authorities, but even just telling her doctor would allow her to meet those exceptions. Now, lawyers in favor of the law explained today that ectopic pregnancies would also be allowed to be terminated because they put the health of the mother at risk, and claim the law allows for and considers various reasons an abortion might be medically necessary. Take a look.
Because the legislature embraced the important values of respecting unborn life, of respecting the health and well-being of mothers, of respecting the integrity of the medical profession.
The bill easily cleared both the Iowa House and Senate last summer and was signed into law by Governor Kim Reynolds. But because of ongoing legal challenges, abortions up to 20 weeks of pregnancy have continued in Iowa while the courts assess the law's constitutionality. Opponents of the law are challenging it under the undue burden standard of Iowa's Constitution, and they argue many women aren't aware they are even pregnant at 6 weeks and claim the law is extreme. The law is set to take effect at the end of this month unless the court rules otherwise before then. Tara, John.
Abby, thank you. Well, now both a warning and a reminder that the heart of the message Japan's prime minister delivered to a joint session of Congress.
That's right. He's in Washington to discuss security in his part of the world. Following Fumio Kishida's speech at the U.S. Capitol, he joined President Biden and Filipino President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. for all three countries' first ever joint summit. CBN national security correspondent Caitlin Burke joins us with more on this key relationship. Caitlin, what are the prime minister's goals for this visit?
Tara, John, as China's influence in the Indo-Pacific grows, Japan seeks to truly solidify its relationship with the U.S. Prime Minister Kishida is specifically looking to strengthen the defense alliance, although in his address to Congress today, he also emphasized Japan's position as America's global partner, ready to take on a greater role in international affairs.
I'm here to say that Japan is already standing shoulder to shoulder with the United States. You are not alone. We are with you.
Kishida stressed his country wants to help preserve freedom and democracy worldwide, not just in the Indo-Pacific.
The Japanese people are fully committed to these values. I do not want to leave our children in a society where human rights were suppressed, where political self-determination is denied, where our lives are monitored by digital technology. I know you don't either.
He himself is trying to speak to the American people to remind them that, hey, a lot of the concerns that you might have about other countries just freeloading off American power and American, treasure and sweat and tears and blood, that's not true. Like Japan is here to share the burden with you.
William Chu with the Hudson Institute tells CBN News Kishida's speech highlighted a shift to a more extensive alliance.
What you're having here is you need a more comprehensive approach that integrates security, trade, economic security, and also a larger sort of technological development.
Kishida pointed out examples such as Japan providing $12 billion in aid to Ukraine, collaborating with the U.S. space program, and investing in the American economy.
As the geopolitical landscape changed and as Japan grew in confidence, we expanded our outlook beyond that of being America's closest ally. We first became a regional partner of the United States, and now we have become your global partner.
As Japan steps into more of a global role, its focus is to partner with other like-minded nations. Today's summit is a key example. It was the first ever involving the U.S., Philippines, and Japan. Kishida says cooperation between the three countries is key to maintaining peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. Tara, John?
All right, Caitlin, thank you. Well, coming up, Israel and the U.S. on high alert, why Washington says Iran could be moments away from attack.
Welcome back. American officials say Iran is threatening to stage a significant attack against Israel.
That's right. A top Pentagon official traveled to Jerusalem Thursday to prepare for the potential assault. Iranian leaders have repeatedly vowed to punish Israel for an airstrike that killed several Iranian commanders in Syria earlier this month. Today, the Biden administration is urging Iran to stand down.
Further escalation of this conflict doesn't just hurt Israel, doesn't just hurt Iran, doesn't just hurt the countries in the region, but that it harms every country in the world. Every country in the world would be hurt by wider regional conflict.
Meanwhile, American and Israeli officials fear that most of the Israeli hostages are no longer alive. Hamas says it may not have 40 living hostages to release in a ceasefire deal. According to the Wall Street Journal, U.S. officials believe Hamas is using any living hostages as human shields deep inside Gaza's tunnels. And while Israel's war against Hamas shows no signs of stopping, fighting also continues to rage in Ukraine. Russian forces destroying a major power plant today in Kiev, intensifying pressure on the country's fragile energy grid. This comes as Ukraine warns it is running out of air defenses fast. The U.S. now says it is only a matter of weeks before Russia outguns Ukrainian forces 10-1. The country's president says victory is still possible, but not without more Western aid.
Ukraine does not ask too much. We need air defense systems and fighter aircraft that can protect our cities from Russian terror.
Ukraine's parliament recently passed a law to boost much-needed drafted soldiers for the battlefield.
Up next, inflation still sky high. What it means for your wallet when Faith Nation returns. Welcome back to the latest on rising inflation and its impact on your personal finances. With consumer prices at a 6-month high, it's unlikely that an interest rate cut is coming anytime soon. Consumer prices in March were up 3.5% compared to a year ago, higher than expected. However, economists point to a potential silver lining. A new Labor Department report says wholesale prices rose by just 0.2% last month, less than expected, providing some relief to analysts while also suggesting underlying inflation may still be easing. Well, Mark Hamrick is Washington Bureau Chief and a senior economic analyst for Bankrate, and he joins us now. Mark, welcome to you. So, Mark, for everyday Americans, stubborn inflation amounts to a question of affordability ultimately, and with more and more turning to credit cards to pay for common expenses. So, Mark, your initial reactions to yet another monthly report showing higher than expected prices?
It's discouraging, John, because we're looking for some relief not only from inflation, but the high level of prices. And those two things are not exactly the same. So when we see, for example, as you mentioned, the better news on inflation that's farther off in the pipeline at the wholesale level, that does provide us some encouragement that as it moves along that pipeline, eventually gets to the retail level, some of that pressure will relent. But we're still talking about consumer prices being 20% broadly higher than, let's say, January of 2020. So there has been some wage growth along the road there. There's been tremendous wealth created by the stock market rally, but that doesn't benefit everyone. And others are benefiting as well from the rise in home values. But you know, the major irritant for most Americans is inflation, and we really haven't been resolved or absolved, I should say, of high prices. They're very much with us. As we look into the details here, food prices are not rising as high as they were before. The major contributors to the rise in the consumer price index were shelter, that includes rent and a measure of home prices, as well as energy prices, and gasoline has contributed to that. And as we know, leading into this interview, you were talking about tensions in the Middle East. We don't have a high level of confidence that we can be relieved of high energy prices, particularly gasoline, either.
Right.
You know, Mark, this has been going on a long time now, it feels like. Do you think we're beginning to see a shift in the prevailing sentiment of expected rate cuts? In other words, have we retreated to a question of if and no longer when?
I would still be betting that we will get rate cuts because inflation is expected to relent somewhat as we get on through this year, next year, and the year beyond. That's dependent on a lot of dominoes lining up or falling. Right now, the expectation is that the Fed will have a rate cut in store at the September meeting. And at their most recent meeting, before we got a look at this inflation data, Federal Reserve officials indicated they thought there would be 3 rate cuts this year. It's probably safer now to assume that we may have 2. And so that means there's going to be a long, hot summer for borrowing rates and no relief in sight from those high borrowing rates. The good news here, however, is what can we do in this environment? Well, one thing is to take advantage of high rates for savings. So we're still getting high yields out there of 4 and 5% on products like high yield savings accounts, certificates of deposit. But as you said with the intro, many people are instead leaning on credit, and that's where you really get dinged because you're talking about 20% plus in terms of an annual percentage rate.
All right, Mark, we are winding down on time, so we're just going to leave it there for the time being. Mark Hamrick with Bankrate, we always appreciate you spending time with us. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, coming up, helping a little boy's dream come to life. That is next on Faith Nation. And finally tonight, honoring one of Illinois' finest.
That's right. A boy received special recognition from his community this week, joining the Linwood, Illinois Police Department as an honorary officer. At just 6 years old, Keon Andrew has endured dozens of surgeries on his heart. That hasn't stopped him, though, or his parents, from pursuing his dream of becoming a police officer. Keon's parents asked if they could bring him to visit the Chicago area police station. The department went a step further by swearing him in as an honorary police officer with the community there to cheer him on. Look at him waving to the crowds. The police chief says they're thrilled to have Keon on the team, and I think he makes a great addition.
Looks good in a uniform.
He looks pretty good in a uniform for 6 years old, and can you imagine just how much experience he'll have by the time he's actually old enough to join the force?
Starting young.
Starting young.
All right. Thanks for joining us on Faith Nation.
Always enjoy having you. Come back and see us again right here tomorrow.